千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Daodejing by Lao Zi. Without further ado, let's get right back into chapter 46, our discussion. First, we'll do a quick recap on what we talked about last time, and then we will pick it up from there. As I mentioned previously, 46 is notable for multiple reasons. It connects the Tao with peace and harmony. It uses vivid imagery to make this point, and it's tied together with the concept of being content or contentment. The vivid imagery you will see as part of the first section. And last time, we were able to divide up this chapter into 3 sections. The first one spoke of having the Tao and not having the Tao from a larger perspective of clashing kingdoms. And we can, in turn, apply that to individual lives. The second section that we're going to be getting into today is all about the greatest crime, the greatest disaster, and the greatest fault. You can tell that this is a section of warning from Lao Tzu to us. These are the things to avoid. And then finally, the last section is all about tying everything together with the concept of contentment. So previously, we spoke extensively on when the world has the Tao, line 1, and when the world lacks the Tao, line 3. So what I would like to do is to recap the difference, what those mean, how they can be applied. So having the Tao, the question that I asked previously was about this expression, having the Tao. I think we all know that the Tao is about that which is always present, that which is always governing everything, whatever that is. So because it is always around, it seems rather odd to have an expression about having the Tao or not having it, because isn't it always present? Isn't it always there? How can you not have it? That would be impossible, right? So last time, we began with a discussion on the meaning of that expression, what it really means. Having the Tao is not, you go from the Tao not being present in your life to suddenly having it. It's always there, but the real meaning is having a workable understanding of the Tao. So it may be around, but if you don't have a workable understanding of the Tao, you won't be able to utilize the Tao. So this should all be very familiar from before. It's just going to be a quick review, a quick recap for everyone. What we talked about also was that having a workable understanding of the Tao, meaning an understanding that is usable, that can be applied, an understanding that is appropriate for the situation at hand. This, however, does not mean that the understanding must be complete or perfect. We still don't know a whole lot about reality, whether from a scientific perspective or from a Tao perspective. we figured out a lot about life based on the teachings of the ancient sages, but certainly we haven't figured out everything yet because we're human beings. Our understanding is imperfect. This is a point that was also one of the main points from the previous chapter, chapter 45. We may never know the Tao completely or perfectly. And the other thing to keep in mind is that what we call the Tao, that's just a label. It doesn't have to go by that name. It can be known by a different label, and that's completely fine. So for instance, if your understanding of the right way to live comes from Christian teachings of universal love, then that's totally fine. That would simply be a different label for the Tao. The Tao can also manifest as social norms of decency that you follow. That's totally fine. It doesn't have to go by the name Tao. We just happen to use it as a speech, a figure of speech, a convenience to facilitate our discussion. Okay, so these two bullet points here are what having the Tao does not mean, and this is followed by what it has to mean. Having the Tao, it must be an understanding that is sufficient, at a sufficient level to produce positive results in your life. And when I say positive results, in the context of this particular chapter, chapter 46, positive results have to do with peace and harmony. Now, the other thing that it must be is that it has to be consistently applied. It has to be something that can produce positive results as the previous bullets, and it's something that you have to actually use every day, consistently applied. So that's what it means to have the Tao. It's a little more complex than the simple characters from the original may suggest, but this is delving into all the levels of hidden meaning right underneath the surface. So what happens when you have the Tao, when the world has the Tao? Well, the line that we also touched on previously was fast horses are retired to till the soil. Fast horses, as we mentioned before, were utilized in times of war for scouting duties because of their speed. In this particular line, in the original Chinese, the last character is fen. As you can see there in the red, the last character there, that character means manure. The actual meaning in this context is that the fast horses are retired to till the soil in order to fertilize it with manure and prepare for planting. And this in turn, when we have this imagery of horses tilling the fields, it means people are peaceful and productive. They are producing food that the people themselves need. So here, it is symbolized by beautiful rice fields, as you can see. So the overall idea is that when nations understand the importance of peaceful coexistence, which is a major teaching in the Tao, they can utilize their resources in productive ways. Horses don't have to be pressed into military service. They can be utilized for growing food. So the overall meaning then is that things are good, generally speaking. Businesses prosper. Arts and music flourish. Science and technology advance. Civilization overall thrives. It's a good thing. So let's explore the flip side of the coin, lacking the Tao. And let's make sure we quickly recap what it means to not have the Tao or lacking the Tao. So this is the reverse. This is the flip side of the coin. It's not having a workable understanding of the Tao, even though the Tao is still there and it hasn't changed. And not having a workable understanding would be erroneous understanding. So as an example, in ancient times, people did not understand the Tao all that well in primitive times. And as the sages taught them the principles of the Tao that they themselves had observed from nature, they began to understand it more and more. Now, to kind of get a handle on this, we can think of natural laws as an example. Just like natural laws, so equate the Tao with natural laws. We know natural laws have always been around, long before humans. Laws of nature have been around as long as nature had been around, which is indefinitely into the past, to the beginning of the universe. So primitive humans, of course, do not understand the laws of nature. They don't understand them much. So for instance, when they saw a volcanic eruption, primitive human beings might misunderstand the volcanic eruption as the wrath of the volcanic deity. This erroneous understanding would lead to bad decisions. Incorrect understanding leads to bad decisions. So for the misunderstanding primitive human beings, they might conclude, they might assume that to appease the volcanic deity, that, oh, listen, everybody, we must make a sacrifice. And then through some kind of primitive logic, and of course, a fitting sacrifice must be, young virgins, obviously, right? So these are bad decisions that resulted from incorrect understanding. Now, the Tao is just like that. Misunderstanding the Tao can lead to incorrect decisions as well. And we ignore natural laws. The last point to be made here is that we ignore natural laws at our own peril. So if, as an example, you ignore the laws of gravity and jump off from a great height without anything to slow you down or cushion your fall when you get to the ground, well, you're asking for trouble. I think we all see that. You can cause yourself serious injury. So it is the same with the Tao. It's always there, but if we don't understand it all that well, we cause problems for ourselves in life. So let's take a look at the national level, as in the overall expression of the Daodejing in the first section. When the world lacks the Tao at the level of the kingdom, nations, and states, war horses give birth on the battlefield. So here too, I want to highlight the very last character there in line 4, and just make sure that you know what that is. The very last character there, jiao, it literally means outlying regions. The actual meaning in this context is the border area between kingdoms. So it's an outlying region for the kingdom. It's where it borders the next kingdom, the neighbor kingdom. So when war erupts with this other kingdom, the outlying region, the border, is where the armies clash. It is the battlefield. Hence, you see the translation here, war horses give birth on the battlefield in the outlying regions. It's another way to say war is hell. When the world lacks the Tao, there's contention, chaos, strife. there's at least thousands dead from every battle. So symbolized here, as you can see, by the terracotta soldiers. So the implication is the flip side of what we saw in the previous few slides. When nations fail to understand the importance of the Tao, they utilize the resources to wage war, which results in misery for all. And the resources touched on in the original text that Lao Zi wrote was about fast horses and strong horses. And now that we know what Lao Tzu meant by having and not having the Tao, I want to bring another angle to give everyone a more complete understanding. So having the Tao, not having the Tao, it's on the same question. Here's another perspective. This other perspective is from Zhuangzi. Zhuangzi is another sage. He wrote extensively about the Tao, and he expressed the following. He wanted to connect the question, does the world have the Tao? When the world has the Tao, it is one particular way. When the world lacks the Tao, it's a different way. He connects that with the following expression. 天下有道，圣人成焉. And I'll explain what that means in just a moment. 天下无道，圣人生焉. Now, before I actually translate this, I want to point out, for those of you who are following closely, who are perceptive, you're going to notice that the first part of this, 天下有道, and the first part of the line below, 天下无道, these are the exact characters in line 1 and line 3 of Daodejing, chapter 46. So then the part that's different is what follows. And in the part that follows, you can also notice that 3 out of 4 characters are the same. In the second part of both lines, the first character, second character, and the last character are all the same. Let me explain. The first 2 characters, 圣人, that means a sage. That means someone who is so wise that the wisdom approaches the divine. And then the last character there, that is the ancient way in classical Chinese to punctuate. So this is actually a sentence ending character. They had no punctuation. They have plenty of characters that serve the role of punctuation. So it marked the end of an expression. So when we put it together, you can see that the first line means when the world has the Tao, sages something. And when the world lacks the Tao, sages something else. Here's what they mean. When the world has the Tao, the sages are able to accomplish their work. So 成, the third character there that is different, it means completion, achievement, attainment. In this context, it means that because peace prevails, because civilization thrives, that is the setting when the sages can best accomplish their purpose of spreading the teaching and strengthen everyone's understanding of the Tao. So it's not just the arts and music and other forms of human attainment that thrive, it is also the teachings of the Tao that also thrive. And then the second line, when the world lacks the Tao, the sages can only try to survive. So the third character there, the second from last that you see, it means to live, or in this case, to survive. So this brings in another observation about what happens when the world has or does not have the Tao. So now we can put everything together, put them next to each other for ease of comparison, so you can see the similarities and differences for yourself. So first, here's Lao Zi. These are the familiar 4 lines that we've been studying, the first 4 lines in this particular chapter. And it's using horses as the basis of imagery, and it's talking about peace and war. Then we have what I just introduced, the expression, the writing from Zhuangzi, and it is superficially the same in that line 1 and line 3 are exact duplicates, but then line 2 and line 4 don't use horses to refer to warfare, but instead talk about the disposition or the situation that the sages find themselves in, and what they have to do, what they're able to do, what they must do. So there you have the difference. And now it is important for us to apply the ideas in Daodejing 46 to the world, the actual world in which we live. So the question goes out to everyone, what about our world? Do we have the Tao? Now, what I like to do here is to start from a historical perspective to talk about whether or not we have the Tao. Well, we'll kind of work our way toward the answer, starting, as I say here, with a historical overview, and I'll bring in the image that we have seen to the left, the productive, peaceful setting, the rice fields, when the world has the Tao, to the right, when the world is at war, when the world lacks the Tao. So here's what I'll say about that. Although ancient China was the birthplace of the Tao, this very chapter tells you that the land of ancient China, and modern China as well, sometimes had the Tao and sometimes not. Historically, this is very true. There's been times of historical peace and prosperity. From Chinese history, if you study that and you come across Han Cao, the Han Dynasty, and Tang Cao, the Tang Dynasty, these are 2 examples that readily come to mind. And the prosperity and peace in those dynasties, they were definitely connected, strongly correlated to people knowing and practicing the Tao. These were the times when the ancient culture was at its best, at its pinnacle of achievement and closest to the human ideal. But this did not last. Like the ever-changing, ever-shifting, ever-transforming yin and yang symbol, this was something that went away as the land of ancient China went into chaos. Just like the yin and yang symbol, when we talk about war and peace, there are always 2 sides. The other side of the peace and prosperity is chaos and strife. The ideals of the Tao during those times have all been forgotten and abandoned, and this happened during much of Chinese history. So that's ancient times. What about today? What do you think? So on the one hand, when we talk about the modern world, we have some indications that things can be progressing in the right direction. Part of the world is relatively peaceful and productive. There's progress in science and technology. Look at the internet. Look at self-driving cars. It's amazing. The image that you see here is of Dr. Steven Pinker. He did multiple TED Talk presentations. In one of them, as you see in this slide, he compared the United States today versus 30 years ago. He noted that in the numbers that per capita homicide was down. Poverty was also down, and same with pollution. That there was compelling evidence about how things were getting better and better. In another presentation, also for TED Talks, he looked at not the United States, but the world in general. He looked at not today and 30 years ago, but the history of humanity over thousands of years and even into prehistoric times. He looked at historical data. He called it forensic archaeology. For example, he's able to look at prehistoric skeletons and see evidence of violent trauma. Humanity had a long history of violence. Then, looking closer to today and the trend that history demonstrated, in his presentations, he talked about historical records of countries with capital punishment that decreased over time, actual executions that decreased over time, the rate of homicide overall, not just in the United States, but in every country of the world, countries that abolished torture. So many signs pointing to what he calls the better angels of our nature, the peaceful Tao slowly prevailing over the human tendency toward violence and cruelty. So there are positive signs. Now, just like Zhuangzi said, it would be times when sages can do their work most effectively. And what that means is to reach out, spread the messages of the Tao, to strengthen everyone's understanding of the Tao, to make sure that there's more and more understanding and that it will not fade or be ignored so quickly. So this is the positive side. We talked about the yin and yang symbol. So is there another side? What do you think? So I am very curious as to what you see as happening in the world. Certainly, there's a sunny and optimistic side presented, in this case, by Dr. Pinker. But what about signs when it's going in the opposite direction? Signs of chaos. Well, I would say, look no further than the evening news broadcast, or in this day and age, news anytime, the 24-hour news cycle. Here I have the image of a news anchor delivering some grave news about the world. Yes, there are still bloody battles all around the world. There are disasters. We hear all about the disasters on the news. There are people suffering incredible misery right now. There are refugees right now trying to escape warfare, famine, genocide, chaos in general. Indeed, one of the effects of this kind of news exposure is that it leads to sort of a doomsday mentality. There are people who feel that looking at the news, surely these are signs of the impending apocalypse. because there are more calamities than ever before, and it seems to be increasing all the time. Now, when we take a step back, we can see that while the world has always had its challenges, it's just that with the advance in communication, we get to find out all about it the moment they happen or soon after they happen. So the psychological effect is that it seems as if things are getting worse and worse, that things are headed for hell in a handbasket, as the expression goes. What do you think? Is it one or the other? Now, in the Tao, one of the things that we always want to keep in mind is that it is never either or. It is never cut and dry. Real world, real life are not that simple. It's a mixed bag. And just as there's yin within yang, there is yang within yin. There's always the seed of the complementary opposite waiting to sprout. And one more thing to mention is that with this particular slide, I am focusing on the West. This is about our world, the Western world. Now, the other question that I can ask is, what about the East? East and West, in many ways, seem like different worlds. So what about Asia? Do they have the Tao over there? Or do they lack the Tao? What do you think? It would, of course, be nice to say that the Tao prevails over there in Asia, whereas it doesn't always do that here. That is a mixed bag here. But that would not be a complete picture of reality, because the people in Asia are just like the people in the West. It's a mixed bag. There are some movements toward the Tao, some movements away from the Tao. Just like the previous slide pointed out, in the land of China, sometimes it had the Tao, and sometimes it didn't. Remember, there is an undeniable part of human nature where we imagine the grass is greener on the other side, right? So we have a tendency to look at another part of the world through rose-tinted lens. We imagine things must be better somewhere else. Why not? So just like it is all over the world, in Asia, things are uneven. You can see aspects of the Tao in places like Japan and Taiwan. In other places, there's conspicuous absence of the Tao. And of course, by that, I am not excluding the land of its origin. I'm not mincing any words, holding nothing back. The bottom line is that right here, right now in the West, as you and I are studying the Tao together, this is actually a great chance that humanity has of letting the ideals of the Tao regain its ancient power. It is possible that we can give the world at least a fighting chance of having the Tao again. And I use the expression having the Tao in the same way that Lao Tzu does. You can probably tell this is why I'm so motivated. You know, some have asked me how long it takes to prepare for this presentation. I tell them it takes the entire day. It's not a problem for me because I will do this week after week gladly if by doing so we actualize even a small chance of revitalizing a small fraction of the ancient Tao. That is why I am here with you. That is why I appreciate your support, the support of this entire group. Now, let's continue with the Daodejing. We will pick up where we left off, starting with the next section. That is lines 5 to 7. I want to start with the first character that begins each line. As you can see, I have shown them in red in this particular slide. Let's explore that. First, we have the character for crime or guilt. The line is, there is no crime greater than greed. So I want to say what you see here in this bullet, Lao Tzu had very clear ideas about right and wrong. And I will observe this. People who have not encountered the authentic Tao may say something like, there is no right or wrong in the Tao. Haven't you heard that before? I sure have. There is no right or wrong in the Tao. What is my response to that? I'll say, wrong. Some may say this, but Lao Tzu absolutely did not. Quite the opposite. To continue on, now we get to disaster. No disaster greater than discontentment. In the Tao, the worst disaster of all is not something that was inflicted upon you from an external factor or someone else, but something that you inflict upon yourself. And the reason is because you have all the power in the world to control your own actions or inaction, and therefore you can control whether or not you inflict disasters upon yourself. In this case, it is discontent that is being inflicted. We'll talk more about this later. Lastly, we have no fault greater than avarice. Avarice, of course, is a sin in the Judeo-Christian tradition, but I have to point out that there's no exact equivalent to the concept of sin in the Tao. That is, there's no divine deity or judge, there's no divine judge to forgive or absolve your sins. There's no need to pray to the Buddha, for instance, or Lao Tzu, or the Tao for forgiveness. Your fault is something that you have to remedy. Either that, or you have to pay back karmically. Forgiveness does not come from a divine source, but comes from those you have wronged. So this line here, a fault is not something to be forgiven, but something to be fixed. When you fix it, you can be forgiven. You may be forgiven by those you have wronged. And also, think about the concept of original sin. You take responsibility for yourself, and that's it. That's it in the Tao. You don't inherit the sin from your ancestors. You are responsible for your actions, your words, not for other people. So that's great. I think everyone is following along these concepts. I think you see, as I do, that there is growing awareness to do things differently. That the concepts that we're used to from pre-existing westernized Judeo-Christian traditions, they're not the only possible ways to live. Here, we're talking about individual responsibilities, collective responsibilities, and this is a conversation we need to have. Let's go further into this section. I think we're on a good track. So here, I want to show the 3 repeating characters from 5 to 7. Lines 5, 6, and 7 have these 3 characters in common. And I want to explain what they mean. First of all, what they sound like. 莫大于. That's in Mandarin. What do they mean? Break it down character by character. Not greater than. The middle character here should be familiar. This is the character for big or great or grand or vast. So the first character is a character of negation. So no greater than means there is nothing greater than. You can simplify this expression with one word, the greatest. So this section is about, simply put, the greatest crime, greatest disaster, and the greatest fault. So you can tell, putting these together, Lao Zi is being quite serious about what he wants to warn everybody of in regards to living life. From the perspective of Lao Tzu, the absolute worst of all is the mental states of greed, discontent, and avarice. And these are, of course, related and linked to one another. They are the ultimate source of negativity, which means for you and me, our biggest problems in life always originate from the endless cravings of ego. So this is an idea that we're going to revisit as we continue to explore this chapter. So let's start with the first one and talk about that in a little more detail. There is no crime greater than greed. You want to remember that as it is with all Tao concepts, you want to apply this at different levels. What I mean by that, as you saw in the first section of this chapter, when we speak of kingdoms, nations, states, warfare between them, this is talking about how war breaks out when one state acts upon its greed for the resources belonging to another state. So I think that's obvious. That's where we have, fast horses being drafted, pregnant mares giving birth on the battlefield, etc. That's at the level of kingdoms and nations. We always have to apply the Tao to the personal level. And that's the other bullet here, the other important bullet. At the level of individual human beings, what this means is that when someone has been blinded by greed, he may break the law to get at his obsession. Thus are criminals born. Greed can be seen as the source of crimes. Crimes in this case would be infraction, violation of norms, of laws, of other people's welfare. So the same idea, the same line, no crime greater than greed, is applied at different levels, as you can see here. And let's also touch on a key concept for this entire chapter, 知足. You see it as the last two characters of line 6. This is important. Two characters, 知足. What do they mean? Break them down one character at a time. 知 means to know something, to realize or understand something. 足, the second character, means sufficiency, having enough. Put them together and the meaning becomes clear. To know sufficiency is to recognize that you already have enough. That's the literal meaning of contentment. You don't need to worry about running out. You have enough. So this is what contentment actually is, a state of calm, reassurance that there's no need to get more, so you can relax. Now that we have covered this important concept of this chapter, this is sort of the introduction to contentment. And let me just point out before we leave this topic entirely, in the next slide, we will get into 不 in front of it. 不 is negation. So when you 不知足, what that means is you don't know sufficiency. You don't recognize that you already have enough. Let's continue. We were just talking about the concept of contentment and discontentment, yin and yang. Now, we want to incorporate that understanding to the entire line. The flip side of contentment is discontentment, to not know that you have enough. Now, it's important when we talk about content and discontent to point out that when you feel discontent, that isn't always a bad thing. At a moderate level, it is motivation. It is what causes you to want to work on yourself. Discontent can be a positive force that motivates you to explore options and maximize your potential. So this is where the yin and yang symbol becomes important again when we think about how everything in moderation can be positive, but when it's carried out beyond the point of moderation, then it can be harmful. So unfortunately, that happens a lot. For many people, it is often pushed beyond moderation, which means it goes from motivation to constant craving. It can go into obsession from there quite easily. When you are in the state of constant craving, there can be no peace of mind. So, to summarize what we have talked about so far, the healthy pursuit of goals is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, it does take wisdom to stop yourself in time, to enjoy what you already possess without feeling like you have to prove yourself in some way. So I want to illustrate that with a story. I want to illustrate that particular wisdom, the wisdom to know that you have enough, that you're still motivated, but you also know the balance of taking the time to enjoy what you possess. How can we have that wisdom? Throughout history, sages have told stories to make this point. There's one that I would like to share with you. This image that you see here is a depiction of Confucius, which in Mandarin, Kongzi, and also called Confuzi. Confuzi is where Confucius came from. Confucius is the Latin version of Confuzi. And next to him, to the right in this image, a younger man. This is Yan Hui, his star pupil. So this is a story written by Zhuangzi to talk about this particular topic, contentment. Hence the title that you see here, Confucius on Contentment. Zhuangzi wrote many stories centering around Confucius, and many of these stories were about conversations that Confucius had with his disciple, Yan Hui. So keep in mind, Confucius lived during the Warring Stage period, when there was a lot of chaos and strife. Confucius often encouraged his students to counsel the various kings and warlords as advisors. He saw this as something they could do as scholars to steer ancient China toward peace and away from chaos. Confucius himself traveled to the various kingdoms, attempting to do exactly that. So because he advocated this and he did it himself, he practiced what he taught, he found it a little puzzling that his star pupil, Yan Hui, stayed back to live the simple life. Yan Hui seemed to be disinclined to pursue high-level positions within the various courts belonging to those rulers. So one day, Confucius decided to ask Yan Hui about this. So he beckoned his student, Yan Hui, come over here. Come here. I have a question for you. Confucius said, you're from a background of poverty, and you still don't have a whole lot in material things. Now, I know you are very intelligent, highly talented. I know you will make a great advisor for any ruler. So I have to ask you, why aren't you out there seeking such a position? Yan Hui responded. He said, Master, I have no interest in such a position. For, you see, I have a small plot of land outside the city. And that land, even though small, it's quite sufficient for me to plant crop for food to feed myself. I also have another small plot of land within the city, and that plot of land, even though small, is sufficient for my other needs. And other than the necessities of life, I find that playing music is quite sufficient for me to entertain myself. Also, studying the Tao principles that you have taught me is quite sufficient for me to feed my mind, my intellect. So because of all this, I have no interest in pursuing high-level positions. So Yan Hui did not say it, but it was apparent what he meant was, I have what I need. I don't need any more than this. This is the source of my joy in life. Now, Confucius contemplated the answer from his pupil, Yan Hui. He found what the younger man said quite convincing. He was impressed, and his expression changed from concern to understanding. So he nodded. He said, very good. Your intentions are definitely on the right track. He said, I have heard the following expression. 知足者，不以利自累也。审之得者，失之而不觉。行修于内者，无畏而不作。He said, I have thought about this expression for a long time, but now I see that they are realized in the words you have spoken. What do these expressions mean? Those who know contentment, 知足者, will not exhaust themselves by pursuing greed. 不以利自累也. Those who are self-sufficient, 审之得者, would not fear the loss of material things. 失之而不惧. Those who cultivate internally, 行修于内者, would not feel ashamed for the lack of position. 无为而不作. So this is the way of Zhuangzi to express these ideas in a more concrete way. Why would it be that those who are self-sufficient, those who are content, that they don't fear the lost material things? They follow the Tao, so they understand what they lose, they are able to regain. This is the kind of spiritual power and spiritual strength that comes from Tao cultivation. It is the reason why we study the Tao. So everyone, if you are interested in more stories from Zhuangzi, additional stories can be found in my book, The Tao of Happiness. If you are not yet familiar with Zhuangzi, he was the sage who taught the Tao through stories. Many of his ideas, concepts, and expressions have been woven into the fabric of Chinese culture. And just as we have learned in this chapter, throughout Chinese history, sometimes the Tao is well known and practiced, and sometimes not. But like the Tao, the stories from Zhuangzi are always there, waiting for a time when people are ready to delve into the teachings once again. It's an important part of what we are doing together. So, as you can probably imagine, it was very important for me personally to write this book. Let's continue with the Daodejing. First, I want to single out a particular character. You see it as the character next to last in line 7. You also see it, the same character, as the last character in line 5. So there's some importance to this character. This character is Yu. And the literal meaning of Yu is desire or want, to desire something or to want something. So when we look at line 7, no fault greater than avarice. So in this context, Yu means excessive desires that lead to greed, lust, and avarice. This is linked to both greatest crime, line 5, and greatest fault, line 7. So I think we would all agree that we should pay close attention to this particular character. One of the things that can be done with some Mandarin characters is that you can look closely at the structure of the character to glean additional insights. Here is the character for Yu: desire, want, greed, avarice, etc. Many Mandarin characters are composed of 2 or more sub-characters. This particular one has a character on the left and a character on the right. So mash the 2 together, you get this character. Let's break them apart to see what they mean. Each half of this character is called a radical. We can gain insights by examining the radicals. In this case, we can see, here's the left-hand side. You can break out the left side of this character, the radical, and it's actually a character by itself. This is the character Gu. It means valley. What is the significance of this? Well, if you've been following these talks for a while, you have seen the repeated use of the valley used by Lao Zi to talk about living life, to represent the self, to be like the valley, to be like the fertile valley that accommodates all, that has a flowing stream through the middle of the valley that has flourishing animals and plants, all different kinds of life. That is a healthy, thriving valley representing a healthy, thriving life. So Gu Valley has deep-seated significance in the Tao tradition. That's the first point I want to make. So what about the other side? What about the radical on the right-hand side? Let's take a look. When you break it out, you see that it actually is another character, qian. It means to owe or to lack. In Mandarin, when you say qian qian, two different characters, similar sound, different pitch, it means you owe money. Here, it means that when you put them together, so remember, valley represents you and life. And then qian, the character, is lacking. What this means is that when you, living your life, feel that you are lacking in certain things, that is when you desire to acquire more. So I hope it makes sense. That is where the desiring and the wanting will come from, is when you have a valley that was essentially originally self-sufficient, but you don't see that. You feel that the valley that is your life is lacking somehow. Not enough plants, not enough animals, not enough streams flowing through the middle of the valley. You want more and more and more. That becomes desire, and it can transition into obsessive behavior quite easily. So this is how we analyze this particular character to arrive at the meaning of yu. So then what's the antidote for this? What's the solution? Well, it is the key concept that we have talked about. It all has to do with knowing that you have enough, or contentment. And that is indeed what we're going to discuss next. Line 8. Thus, the satisfaction of contentment. Let's talk about that. We can see the key concept in this chapter is contentment. It really does make the biggest difference in one's life. So let's talk. Discontentment drives you to pursue fame and fortune, and the extreme form of this drive leads to negativity. Now, even without knowing the works of the great sages, even without studying the Tao, a simple observation of our own world, our own lives, our society, we see plenty of examples of this. We see the extreme drive for fame and fortune leading to negativity. Happens all the time. Of course, we also have to keep in mind that just as Confucius was asking Yan Hui about his not pursuing the position, of an advisor or counselor to the kings, knowing contentment, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have no ambitions whatsoever. The position of Confucius was Tao-centric. That is, he himself and his students that did seek out positions of authority, they wanted to do that out of a self-centric motivation. It's the reason why he asked Yan Hui, hey, how come you're not acting on that? How come you're not acting on Tao-centric goals and aspirations? Tao-centric goals and aspirations can most definitely include pursuits in the material world. And yes, up to and including great wealth and or prestige. the requirement for Tao cultivators is that these goals must not be ego-driven. They must not be pursued for the sake of bettering only the self. So the pursuit can include all the things that we normally would think of as being too greedy, but it can be done in the Tao context. I wanted to stress and emphasize this because unlike in many schools of thoughts that I have encountered over the years, in the Tao, there's no special nobility in being poor. There's no nobility in poverty. It's all about the way you go about acquiring the wealth or material things. Now, this doesn't apply to everyone, of course. Some people can pursue those goals from a Tao-centric perspective, like Confucius. That's totally fine. But for other people, this can mean living the simple life. And the simple life is a way to live that can bring a lot of joy and happiness. And that, as you heard from the story, is what Yan Hui was able to clarify for Confucius. So then let's continue on to the last line. The last line is important. The last line talks about the lasting satisfaction. So I want to address this concept of something being lasting. So we start out with the Tao itself. The Tao is eternal. When we have characteristics that are congruent with the Tao, they take on the eternal aspect of the Tao. They last. So we can tell if something is in accordance with the Tao by seeing if it lasts. Here's what it means. If the temporary satisfaction of acquiring a material thing fades quickly after acquisition, then you know it's not in accordance with the Tao. Pursuing those material things was not what the Tao has meant for you to accomplish in your life. On the other hand, if you have lasting satisfaction, if recognizing that you already have enough brings you that level of lasting satisfaction, then yeah, you can be pretty sure that what you're following is very much in accordance with the Tao. So that is exactly where we want to lead into the lasting satisfaction. Now, in this bullet, I talk about recognizing that you already have enough, bringing that lasting satisfaction. Therefore, the logical question to ask is, how can we come upon that recognition? How can we recognize that we already have enough? What if I'm convinced that I don't? In the Tao, all it takes is to attain that recognition by a slight change of perspective. When you look at the same thing in a different way, you can see it in a brand new light. So there is a story in the Tao tradition that I think will help all of us make that mental switch. It's a story that I call the Tao of Contentment. Here's how the story goes. Once upon a time, in ancient China, there was a young man who was always complaining about his bad luck in life. He felt he had many unfair obstacles all stacked up against him. So these obstacles prevented him, in his view, from becoming as wealthy as he deserved to be. They prevented him from attaining a high level of position in society. As a result, he was not a happy camper, to say the least. He was constantly frowning, constantly feeling depressed. Whenever he thought about this, he had nothing but anxiety and worries. One day, this unhappy young man came across a Tao sage. He saw that the much older man radiated an inner joy, that somehow this old sage had a calm joy. In his expression, it was unmistakable. This was so different from what the young man felt about himself. He saw this, he could not help it, he sighed. He was like, thinking about his own life. The Tao sage took note of this right away and spoke to the young man out of concern. He said, young man, are you all right? Is there something wrong? And the young man said, I'm fine, master. I'm so sorry. I did not mean to cause any alarm. I was just thinking about my life, master, the young man said. It's just that when I saw you, I could see how serene and truly happy you are. I could not help but feel envious. I thought to myself, why do I feel so troubled? Why do I have so little wealth? In response, the sage said, so little wealth? I think quite the opposite. I think you are clearly quite wealthy. This seemed quite odd to the young man. Quite wealthy? Master, I have plenty of worries. Sometimes I think that's all I have. I have nothing else. How can you possibly say that I am quite wealthy? So the sage said, tell me, young man, if someone were to give you 1,000 silver coins in exchange for 10 years of your life, would you agree to the deal? And the young man said, what? 1,000 silver coins for 10 years of my life? Of course not, master. I mean, I don't know how long I will live in my lifetime, but I certainly can't sell any of my years. I need them myself. So no, the answer is a definite no. All right, the sage continued. So what if the buyer wants to buy something else other than years of your life? What if he makes a much more lucrative offer? For instance, if this buyer were to give you 5,000 gold coins for your health, would you make that deal? 5,000 gold coins. And the young man again said, no, master. He seemed horrified by the thought of selling his health. And the sage said, are you sure? That's a lot of money. And the young man said, I'm quite sure, master. I wouldn't want the misery of sickness or injury for any amount of money. So then the sage said, all right, in that case, final offer. What if the buyer says 10,000 gold coins for your life? Your life. So of course you won't be around anymore once you've made the deal. But listen, your family will be very well taken care of. Absolutely not, master, the young man exclaimed. It's my life. Suddenly, the sage laughed. Young man, by my calculation just now, you possess at least 16,000 coins. Isn't it clear that you are quite wealthy? The end. So let's break it down. Let's break down this particular story. So what did the young man think? Well, the young man focused on what he lacked. He did not know sufficiency. He did not know that he already had everything he needed. The sage went beyond pointing out that he had just what he needed. The sage pointed out that what he had already possessed was actually of very high value. His health, his life, the years still ahead of him. Now, these are the same basic things that we all possess. Therefore, we too have at least 16,000 coins in the expression of the sage. When we look at it this way, we can also see, well, it's not just, the health, life, and the years ahead of us that we possess. We've got even more than that. So what we possess is a lot more than the 16,000 coins. That's the point of this story. Throughout the entire Daodejing, there are many other chapters that also refer to this key concept of contentment. So what I want to do is to make sure you have a handy reference here that'll show you in one place where those references can be found, including the chapter that we're studying today. So on the subject of contentment, in chapter 33, it says, those who know contentment are wealthy. And now you can link that directly to this story. And then we have chapter 44. This is only a couple of chapters ago that said, knowing contentment avoids disgrace. That makes greater sense when you link it together with the ideas from this chapter that talks about how discontent can lead to all kinds of problems, up to and including disasters, faults, and criminal behavior. So, of course, those are the disgrace that one can avoid by knowing contentment. Makes all the sense in the world. And then 46, this is a chapter where contentment is mentioned more than the other chapters. It's mentioned twice. The first time it is mentioned is no disaster greater than discontent. That's when you don't know that you have enough. That's when you don't know sufficiency. And then the other instance is what we have just went through. The satisfaction of contentment is the lasting satisfaction. So this brings us to the very end of our discussion on 46 today. What I would like to do now is to take everyone to the summary so we can conclude our discussion for today. What I want to do first is to remind everyone about the summary from last time. Remember, previously we talked about 天下有道, 天下无道. the world has the Tao or the world lacks the Tao. And what I had for you was a series of questions about using that idea to apply to your own life, to your world. Does your world have the Tao? To what extent would you say it is present, the Tao is present? And how would you get to a point where you have the Tao strongly present in your life? And then there's also 天下无道. This is about the times when the Tao is missing in your world, that when there's contention, when there's unhappy friction with other people, that the Tao is missing or lacking. So these were just questions for self-reflection. You certainly don't need to tell anyone. If you want to let me know what your thoughts are, I welcome your correspondence. Now, I want to get to the summary for today. Today, the key idea is transitioning from 不知足, which means discontent, to the very last line, 常足, which is a lasting satisfaction. How can you go from one to the other? So to transform discontent into lasting contentment, the first thing to point out in relation to the story that we have just talked about is that you possess treasures in addition to life, health, and the years that are ahead of you. So let me challenge everyone with the following question. Can you think of other treasures in life that you already possess? And then what I'll do is that I'll share some thoughts on what we all possess. And please feel free, whatever comes to mind, just go ahead and type it in. And I'll go ahead and talk about the things that we have in addition to life, health, and the years ahead of us. First, there's family. I'm using the term family in the greater sense, not necessarily the biological family that you're born into, but the family that you have the opportunity to create, the family that you can be a part of and build on. So yeah, I can see that everyone is thinking along the same track. That's excellent. So in a similar vein, I want to also talk about friendship. I know this is also on everyone's mind. And here again, just like the family is not the family necessarily that you were born into, here I want to address not just the friends you already have, but the new friendship that is waiting for your discovery in the future. So remember, the sage in the story talks about the years that are still ahead of the young man. That's a very Tao perspective. We apply the same reasoning here, not to just look at what we have in the present, but also looking forward to all the positive connections, relationships that we can build in the future, up to and including love in its many manifestations. So, steering away for a moment from relationships, including family and friendship, let me also talk about mind. Your mind. And here, I'm not just talking about what you already know, but all the new concepts you will explore, and hopefully the new concepts that you will explore with me, that we can all explore together. And what I can see now by your response over the internet is that you are definitely thinking along the same track. You are definitely transforming your mind to a mindset of gratitude and contentment. You're talking about respect, trust, Values, excellent. These are excellent. Input, appreciation, excellent. Gratitude, life, the opportunity to study the Tao, and that's exactly what I want to talk about last. The Tao deserves to be repeated. The bottom line is, I am so grateful that we know about the Tao. We have the opportunity to know something about the Tao when many people still do not. It's my job, it's my mission in life to get as many people to know about it as possible. And thank you for supporting me in my quest. It is such a privilege for me to travel the path of the Tao with you. This list doesn't end here. You can create your own list. You already are doing that. We have joy, we have nature. My goodness, these are the things we possess. And don't we need to remind ourselves that we possess them? Because frankly, times are pretty tough right now. Times are a little disheartening when you pay attention to what's going on in the world, in our society. We have to do everything we can to keep in mind the treasures that we already possess. Way more than 16,000 coins. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.